Warm welcome, everybody, to our webinar today, Climate and Tax Justice. Why couldn't one go without the other? It is early in time, so maybe we have 1 or 2 more minutes in order to get going. Everybody the chance to join in. My name is Markus Trilling. I am with the European Network on Debt and Development, Eurodebt, and on behalf of the European Youth Forum, Financing for Development, Children and Youth Constituency, the Youth for Tax Justice Network, and Eurodebt, I am very pleased to moderate our get-together today to discuss why tax and climate justice must go hand in hand, and how we can make this happen, that both interlink and make the maximum out of 2 worlds, climate finance, and taxation. Before we are deeply diving into our debate, please allow me some housekeeping rules to share with you. You are cordially invited to use the chat function to share your thoughts, to make your comments, to have a lively debate. We have as well a Q&A function, so please put in your questions, whatever your question may have to the panelists. And then, as you see, we kindly have as well international sign language interpretation. Dear participants, this year marks the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, the global deal to stop the planetary climate catastrophe, 10 years. And yet, greenhouse gas emissions are still rising in 2024, 10 years after. Last year was the hottest year on record. And for the first time, we were exceeding the 1.5 degree climate target of the Paris Agreement. And as you probably are very well aware, this year's climate conference, the COP30, is taking place in Brazil, in Belém, in just a couple of weeks. And one of the big questions there, where to find the trillions needed for climate action, for climate mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, particularly in the global south. So this will be one of the big COP questions. And right over the ocean, in Nairobi, in Kenya, at the same time, in 2 weeks, the member states of the United Nations are sitting together to negotiate a new global tax treaty, the UN Tax Convention, and it should be, and it can be, a tax convention for sustainable development. This is on the table at the moment, and it's really a unique and historic opportunity for creating transparent, inclusive, fair, and equitable tax rules, a tax system for sustainable development. And we are convinced that such new tax rules can release the hundreds of billions of additional tax revenues. If only are we able to stopping the tax dodging of big multinational corporations, of the ultra rich, and finally as well make the big corporate polluters pay for the damage they are creating. And this money we could, of course, channel into climate action. So this is a bit my introduction today of where we are, why we meet in this nice hour. But now please allow me to introduce our distinguished panel for today, who will then later on dive deeply into our topics. So with us today, Asya Ulkadi. Asya is Officer for Sustainability and Global Cooperation at the European Youth Forum. Please welcome Jaewon Choi, who is the thematic focal point on international tax cooperation for the financing for development, children and youth constituency and the major group for children and youth. We are very pleased to have Alan Muhereza Mugrangira with us. Alan is a Pan-African lawyer and team lead at the Youth for Tax Justice Network. And last but not least, our dear Tove Riding. Tove is Eurodebt's policy and advocacy manager for tax justice. Right. The next thing would be rather not our panelists speaking, but we would like to quiz you participants. Are you ready to get into the ring of the climate and tax negotiations? For this purpose, we have 6 questions for you, which we now put on to the screen, and you have 5 minutes to answer all of them. Please go to those 6 questions and then submit them. On your marks, get set, go. 5 minutes. One of the big questions nowadays is, of course, what does the fossil fuel industry does with all of its lots amount of cash? Other question of today, have you heard of an NCQG eventually? Further on, we're wondering if you know what the current global tax rules signify. Then, indeed, tax justice and climate justice were topic in the tax convention negotiations. Question is, who? As we're nearing COP30, what is the biggest opportunity? And then there was one region very big in pushing for a new global tax deal. Can you tell us which region this is? I can tell already there's a lot of capacity in our webinar today. Good to see. So, and we give it 1 more minute with you. And herewith, I would like to end our poll. So we are closing it and now sharing the results quickly. So again, just to wrap up here, indeed, the fossil fuel industry only spends 1% of its enormous cash into renewables. Who had thought this? Maybe we tax them more. Indeed, the NCQG is, as you all have, with a majority knew, it's a new collective quantified goal on climate finance, on which we will hear much more very soon. Yeah, the global tax rules indeed will be born and ruled still mainly by countries from the global north. This is true. They are existed, but maybe this can be a different debate. Cameroon was our champion in the tax convention negotiations in New York in summer when the topic became very concrete. The Just Transition Work Program on the Belém and Action Mechanism is the big topic at COP indeed. And then last but not least, it was the Africa group who really pushed through the UN Tax Convention. So congratulations to all the winners. It was, as I said, very nice to see that we have so much knowledge and capacity in our room today. Speaking of NCQG and COP30, I would now give the floor to our panelists to really talk us through what is at stake, what is happening, how this fits together, and most important, how we get all into it to make the best out of it for tax justice and climate justice. Asya, please, you have the word.
Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon for some of you. So as Marcus mentioned, I'm Asya from the European Youth Forum. So in terms of COP, I would start with explaining a bit what is COP. So as you might know, it's called the COP as the Conference of the Parties. It's a space where UN countries are going to meet under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and they will be deciding how the world responds to the climate crisis. But as you might know, COP is not just an environmental meeting, it's also an economic and a justice forum. It's also a space where decisions are there to determine who pays, who profits, and who bears the risk on the climate. I think as well, when we talk about the climate finance, we're also talking about power, which is not always mentioned, but it's also about who is funding the climate action and who can receive the supports. It is clear that for now, it should be under the Paris Agreement, and it is, of course, must be based on fairness and legal obligation. It should not be a charity, as we hear in some of the discussion. The other point on my side is also why, as well, talking about climate and taxation together at COP is essential. We're talking about climate finance. It is about who decides who pays for the transition and who benefits from it. So taxation is part of that. It's also about deciding where governments will get revenue and whether climate action is funded through solidarity or debt. It's also another big question. For our generation of young people, it's not just technical, it's also about intergenerational justice. The problem is that if governments keeps funding fossil fuels, for instance, and rewarding wealth, we are paying twice as young people, so once through taxes and once again through the climate negative impacts. In terms of the political context that on what's happening in big lines in COP30. So as you might know, in the past COP, so high-income countries, especially the EU and the global north in general, have a clear responsibility to lead, which is not always done. So ambition is clearly eroding in the last COPs. COPs in COP29 in Baku, for instance, failed to deliver a credible finance package. And communities, especially vulnerable ones, are still waiting for adaptation, loss and damage, and just transition funding. at Bonn, so the meeting, what we call the SB 62, where there is a preparation or ahead of COP 30, developing countries have demanded accountability under the 9.1 of the legal obligation for developed countries to provide public funding. Two other things on our side. One big development in the past COP is the NCQG, what we call. It was mentioned in the question in the beginning. It's called the new Collective Quantified Goal that is meant to replace the outdated 100 billion goal to define how much climate financed developed countries will provide and how it will be delivered and to whom. It's critical that this tool is fair and transparent. It's not the case yet, and discussions are still lacking of ambition and clarity. It is also a big problem that in the NCQG, commitments remain weak or voluntary, so which means that finance will continue to flow into fossil fuels instead of climate solutions. So it needs really to be addressed in order to remain under the 1.5 goal. Other point on finance is the Baku to Belém roadmap that aims to scale up climate finance to developing countries, targeting at least 1.3 trillion per year by 2035. It's designed to support low carbon and climate resilient development through contribution, adaptation plan, but also using grants, concessional funding, and fiscal measures. But something to be clear, the roadmap is not a negotiated outcome yet. Still, discussions are still ongoing on scale, sources, and accountability. And also to mention, current figures estimate that the need for the Global South are estimated more at actually 6 trillion by 2030 for survival. So this really needs to be addressed. In terms of the general position of the European Youth Forum, so it's really important that we are demanding that current finance plans don't rely anymore on private investment, but more in terms of public investment, and also, of course, mentioning that there needs to involve the most affected, especially young people. COP13 Belém must be remembered as the moment where finance turned from promises to justice, and we cannot rely on the private goodwill or voluntary pledges. The next decade must be funded by public responsibility, fair taxation, and intergenerational solidarity. We're not asking for charity. We are demanding a fair economic system that invests in our shared future. We're also aware that there's already global movement around it. So maybe, Tove, you can tell us a bit more about the global movement on taxation that is happening and that will, of course, be continuing at the same time of COP in Nairobi.
Thank you so much, Asia, and thank you to everyone who joined this webinar. Yes, indeed. While you'll be sitting in Brazil following the climate negotiations, we're going to be sitting in Nairobi following the tax negotiations. And why is that interesting? Well, the first thing about tax is it's very interesting. The tax movement is very clear. There's no lack of money in the world. We expect to see several trillionaires, individuals that own $1 trillion, to become a reality within the next few years. We've never seen as much inequality as we do today. And at the same time, we see big multinational corporations, including oil companies and other types of fossil fuel companies, that pay very little tax. And so this is the problem we have today, is that if you are very rich or if you're a big corporation, you can still use tax havens to lower your tax payments. And the first problem with that is that we get this lack of public funding. Even though there's lots of money, there's so little public money because we're not managing to tax the biggest players. And the second problem there is that the governments, they look for money. So they start taxing everyone who can't run away and can't use tax havens. And so we're seeing a lot of taxation on workers, but also on consumers. And often, I think young people sometimes think they're not taxpayers, but if you've ever been to a supermarket and bought something, or if you had a sandwich somewhere, then look at the receipt. There's actually quite a heavy taxation on consumption these days. And that's unfair because it means that poor people end up paying a very big part of their income in tax. And sometimes we actually see that the poor people pay more in tax than the rich people. So this is hugely unjust. And the last problem we have with the tax system is that the polluter pays principle. It makes no sense because billionaires have very big carbon footprints. And of course, the fossil fuel companies are a huge part of the reason we have a climate crisis. And we can't introduce the polluter pays principle unless we start fixing the tax rules. So the good news is that we can definitely do something about this. And what we have now, and this is very historic, that they've started negotiating a convention, the legally binding agreement on tax. And we're aiming to try and stop tax havens and create a just and environmentally responsible tax system. But it was a long fight, and we first have a little video to show some of the journey we've been on to get to where we are today.
Draft Resolution A/C2/78/L18/Ref1 is adopted.
So there you go. I think it's also a good reminder that we managed to have a lot of fun in the tax movement. But this shows how we've been campaigning for over a decade to have the convention. And the negotiations, as the video says, the negotiations started in August. The good news is that the mandate we have, it makes it very clear that sustainable development, including environment, that's part of the job. The UN Tax Convention needs to deliver an international tax system for sustainable development. And it's very clear that environmental issues should be integrated into this. The problem we have is that the negotiations started and we had a big group of tax experts from the governments negotiating the convention. But when we got to sustainable development, it was actually quite open, and many of the negotiators said, I don't know anything about this. So right now, the sustainable development part is not getting turned into reality. And luckily, as the quiz said, we had Cameroon jump in and said, we cannot fail to address this. So Cameroon said, we really need to make sure that sustainable development is covered. We were super happy about that. But we have less than 2 years to finish this negotiation. So now we're really keen to make sure that the tax negotiations get really interlinked with the climate negotiations, and also that all the great movements and all the great efforts at the national level, that we all team up and make sure that we get a tax agreement that really reinforces the fight for climate justice and at the same time addresses inequalities. So that's the battle that we have.
Thank you, Tove, for this, and then maybe something to ask you as well, since I will be following the negotiation in Belém, and in a lot of the discussion and meetings we're having there, when it comes to commitments from countries, mainly from the global north or from the EU. Is that it's still difficult to get money for climate, or we don't have money, or it's not really a big priority for us, like for the government, of course. So my question is here to you is also, how can we mobilize climate finance, and potentially suggestion for governments? So that could also be arguments for the organization who will be in Belém.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. I mean, I would say that tax is a quite magical tool because it can turn private wealth into public money. And we've seen this in the discussions. From a tax perspective, we're really concerned that the big, rich millionaires and billionaires and big corporations, they're not paying their taxes. And then they get invited in when the money is discussed, and they're being referred to as philanthropists, and we're begging them to see if they might feel like investing a little bit in social issues and environmental justice. We just need to tax them. So for us, the private finance, the reason we have such enormous wealth is because the tax system has failed, and we need to mobilize governments to fix this injustice.
Thank you so far. So then, I think the next question is for everybody here on the call. How do we get there? What needs to happen to mobilize, to get people interested, eventually to get youth constituencies involved on the streets during the climate negotiations, and make the case for tax justice delivering on climate justice?
Well, I think when we work in the youth constituency, a lot of the people and young people that I interact with always ask this question: why FFD? Why tax? And I think that question has a lot of weight when it comes to the perspectives and the interest of children and youth on the tax process itself. I think after the fourth International Conference on Financing for Development, we had a lot of awareness about young people, about how governments finance development and how that financing sort of affects our present and our future as young people. But I think despite that progress that we see that children and youth are not being actively involved in sort of key spaces, and one of them is tax. But I don't think this is due to a lack of interest among young people. No, they're very interested in this tax process. It's largely because tax and fiscal policy are viewed by young people as something that is very daunting compared to others like climate, because it is very technical, full of sort of specialized language, jargon, and other concepts that sort of intimidate other newcomers who want to advocate in this process. And so I think it is very important for us to consider how tax systems sort of shape our realities, because I think it's very much cross-cutting. Like, it's more often than directly than we realize. And I think there's a lot of examples about how tax affects the lives of young people. I mean, some of them include, like, is our public education, healthcare systems are being adequately funded? or the question about who pays more and who benefits from tax. Like, do we have tax systems that would burden low-income families? Or do we have tax systems that would make the wealthier individuals and corporations pay their fair share? So I think when I always approach that question about why tax, I always like to highlight this phrase, which is that tax equals to justice. Effective and just tax systems ensure that those who have the most, those who have benefited the most from others, can contribute fairly to the societies they benefit from. And that resources can actually reach the communities and rights holders that need them the most. And so I think for children and youth, tax is especially important because many of us depend on social services, schools, healthcare systems, public transport, social protection programs. I mean, they're all funded by tax. And I think inequality in tax systems that we see of today directly contributes to inequalities and opportunities for us tomorrow. And so I think how countries manage and cooperate on the matters of taxation will determine if the future generation, the next generation like us, will inherit economies that are sustainable and fair, or we become locked in the existing cycles of debt, exclusion, and inequality. And so I think youth participation in the tax negotiations and in the broader conversation of reforming the international financial architecture is really critical. And so because of this, one of our major goals as a constituency is to have a formal mandated space for children and youth. I think modeled after other examples of other mandated constituencies, like in the climate change process, which is something that we call Yungo, we want to create a mandated constituency that would sort of ensure that children and youth have an official and protected space to participate in the convention process, not just in the negotiations of its drafting, but its review, its implementation and follow-up, including when the actual convention becomes adopted in 2027. And so I think for us as young people, at least for our constituency, we sort of think about a future where tax cooperation isn't being considered in terms of fiscal policy, numbers, data, and revenues, but it's more considered at a larger concept of fairness and inclusion and justice. I think if that framework convention can really embed those values from the start, I think it's not just a question about a breakthrough in global tax cooperation. I think it will be a landmark moment because that convention will be one of the most youth responsive and youth inclusive conventions in the UN system. And I think it will sort of ensure that we have a space, that children and youth are valid rights holders and that we are able to effectively contribute in this agenda. So I think this process is absolutely critical. And so now I think it's a good time to ask my good colleague Alan about how we can really advocate for those things, both on ground, grassroots and such.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jean, for that submission as to why it is important to have young people within this process and why it is important that when moving forward we should have young people. I think mine is really just to say we're having young people in Belém, we're having young people in Nairobi, and then we're talking about this conversation that is more or less two sides of the same coin. We need resources to deliver on climate financing. We know that we know that we failed within our earlier targets, where countries had committed quite some good monies. We've not seen that money, and then we're even having bigger targets. But also we know, like Toby said, that we are not short of money. There are quite a lot of resources. We just need to tax them and get them. So where do we go on from now? I think, and I will just call it post-November, post-Belém, post-Nairobi. What do we have to do as young people in the climate financing movement or climate change movement, but also as young people within the tax justice movement that are engaging to have a fair and just UN framework convention on international tax cooperation? I think one thing we have first to do is to have some sort of unified narrative or unified language or unified sort of demands when it comes to discussing some of these issues. Like we said, it's the two faces of the same coin. So as we are talking about raising resources, climate financing, I think it is important that we have some sort of unified narrative that this is the same conversation. They are the same polluters that are not paying tax. They are the same polluters that are benefiting from tax havens. They're the same polluters that control our government. So you're not putting climate protections, but you're also not taxing in terms of tax policy. So when it comes to the message, the narrative that we should be having, I think it should be speaking to the same thing. And why this is important is then when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to us talking about these things, our governments should be hearing the same thing from the more different angles or from different sources. So it should be young people in climate saying, actually, we need to tax. We need to do away with harmful tax incentives for some of these fossil companies. We need to do away with all of these things. They don't have to wait for, young people in the tax movement. So the idea is that we have to have a unified narrative that says that this is the same conversation that we're having because they are the same perpetrators, we are the same victims. So that is, I think, something that we need to do. After having done that, I think then we need to have and create joint spaces for action and engagement. We know there's a lot that is happening. Different movements are doing different things. We have different constituencies that are trying to engage young people. But I think now is the time to say that for us to be seen, not just seen, but also to unify and have the same message put forward to our governments. And I think this is where the local or the national engagements come in. We have a lot of young people doing a lot of good climate change work within our different countries. They engage governments within different spaces and all that. We have young people. They may not be very many at this time that are doing tax justice related work, that are doing fiscal justice related work, looking at the budgets, where is the money coming from, where are we allocating it? Are we planning, for example, for climate adaptation in our budgets? Are we thinking that maybe before we look for people to give us charity in terms of adaptation, can't we tax them within our fiscal policies? As you know, we're trying to finance our budgets during our annual budget processes. So that's the second thing that
Alain, I fear we have lost your precious voice. I think you're still, and now you're frozen. We might have an internet connection issue here, which I would really regret, because you make the point so strongly about unifying narratives, creating and occupying the spaces, to see fiscal policies indeed as relevant for the public, for future generations. It would be just a shame to miss out on the last points you want to make. So maybe I think Alain is restarting and coming back to us soon, I hope. In the meantime, I still would like to invite all our participants to think if they have questions for our panelists. If so, please put them into the question and answer function. If in the meantime, maybe as well, we can further look around what concretely can happen, should happen with the youth and COP30, particularly.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe to also build a bit on what Alan was mentioning and on the need of mobilization, I hope he comes back very quickly. But I think one of the concrete way to engage into the negotiation is through YONGO. I think it was mentioned by Jiwon earlier, which is the official youth constituency to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. They're a global network of youth organizations and young people who are working on climate issues, and the role is to represent youth into the climate negotiation. So trying really to ensure that there is a youth engagement around the topic, of course, around the climate justice and intergenerational equity. And I think 3 ways to engage in YONGO, but also a little bit beyond, of course, is around joining the YONGO working group. So there are different working groups based on the negotiations track. So everything is available on the website of YONGO, these working groups are contributing to policy papers, statements, but they also organize meetings, for instance, with policymakers and UN institutions during COP. So I would really recommend you to engage with them. And they are also organizing, of course, side events and also organizing a local or regional conference of youth in different parts of the world. My other point on my side is also around building or engaging with networks and coalitions. There's a lot of civil society organization, youth organization who are active in the framework of COP. Feel free to get in touch with them. I think you can definitely share a lot of knowledge, engage with them, engage with their activities in order to amplify as well your demands on climate finance, taxation, and so on. And then the third point as well is also around advocacy beyond the conference. So there's a lot of consultation who are organized, for instance, who were organized by the COP presidency, a lot of national campaigns, again, organized by a lot of the civil society or youth organization. And then also it's also around like organizing events around this topic to make sure that these points are heard, discussed, and then of course engagement with policymakers at different levels. So whether it can start with the local level, but it can also be at national level or more regional level. And I hope Alan can maybe continue. So I was just presenting a bit the engagement throughout YONGO while you are trying to reconnect.
Yes, apologies for that. I got a power disruption, which messed up my internet a bit. So I apologize for that. Anyway, I was saying about creating joint spaces for engagement and advocacy. I think the third thing, I think I'll be quick. The third thing, of course, is now building a coalition, joint mobilizing and advocating for the things that we believe in. So we've already, assuming that after or post November, we're building a unified narrative. We are building positions that are saying this is the same conversation. We are saying that we are building then in terms of the spaces that we create. So whichever, and I think as you talked about some of the things that they're going to be doing, I think within those spaces, within those side events, within those webinars, within those things, I think it's important that we cannot talk about climate financing, for example, without talking about the need for tax justice at a global level. And then, of course, lastly, is that we should actively participate as young people within these negotiations and the processes that follow. I think Joanne talked about it. We know for a fact that the negotiations on the UN Tax Convention are going to go up to 2027. That is if we're able to beat the timelines, but it could be longer. But we also know that there are also going to be negotiations around other protocols. We started with 2 protocols. We're hoping that one of the other protocols will be a protocol dealing with the environmental issues, but not to even lose that bet in that. The idea is that every year we know that we'll have COP at least, but also we know that we are going to have these negotiations going on 2027. Hopefully, we'll also get to see negotiations of other protocols, but also, as Joanne said, how do we then make sure that after having campaigned to have this just framework, how do we then get to see to it that it is implemented? And of course, that's where we come in doing our national mobilization. Of course, most of the work starts at a country level, then we go up to the regional level. But at least the Framework Convention gives us that sort of mandate to say to our countries that this is what we agreed, and let us go through with it. So in terms of moving forward, then it means that we must not only engage in the negotiations themselves, but we must also mobilize, and this mobilization, I think, should be political mobilization, because there's been some sort of capture by these very wealthy entities and individuals that are making sure that no policy reform is coming, whether it's in an environmental sort of side, or no policy reform is coming from the tax point of sight. So the idea is that now, with a framework convention, I think we can mobilize at a local level to say to our governments that we need this to happen, and we need it to happen within our lifetime. I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you very much. I apologize for my power outage, but I believe and I hope that those are some of the things that we can be able to do post-November to see to it that we have resources and we have them in a just and fair manner. Thank you very much.
Alan, thank you. Thank you very much, all our fantastic panelists, for really highlighting the two sides of the same coin. This is climate justice, tax justice. This is about global inequalities on who is affected, who can pay for it, who has the biggest ecological footprint in it. So I'm very, very pleased to have this together with you, really talked through and thought through. And now we have a number of questions which are as well very much intriguing and very much to the point. So let me take out two, and maybe some of you has an answer. So the first question, as from Kamala, very relevant. There's a high degree of inequality in the climate finance a world at the moment. Global South very much deprived from public resources, under debt pressure and stress. Africa particularly hit hard. So Kamala is asking, how do we bring global North countries to account to fulfill their promises? This is one question. Let me just as well maybe go to the questions. Is taxation a topic at COP30 this year? And how can eventually civil society representatives raise their voice to indeed make taxation an issue relevant for COP30 and climate finance questions? So those two questions, Global North countries, COP30. Do I have any of my panelists want to answer? Tove, maybe, would you want to take the one on the Global North eventually?
I'm happy to take a swing at the Global North, and I think Asia and J1, please also come in, and also on COP30. Indeed, the Global North dominance and the injustice towards the Global South, we're seeing the same picture on tax. It's the same picture everywhere. And that's how we ended up with these very, very bad tax rules, is actually because the Global North countries, for the last 50 years, they have completely dominated the definition of global tax rules. And they've done that through the OECD. But the good news here is that the reason we have a tax convention negotiation is because the African countries just wouldn't take it. And they teamed up and they went to the UN General Assembly. And it was actually through the Global South pressure that we got this process. So the United States has left all the processes that we're talking about, but the Global North countries came to the table and negotiated. And they did that because they're afraid that all the developing countries are going to team up and create their own tax system and make it a condition. If companies want to come to their countries, they have to comply with these tax rules. So now we have Global North negotiating, but we're very, very firm on the fact that we need a just deal. And that means fixing the tax rules. There are both some problems with tax havens that impacts countries everywhere, but there are also special rules that impact developing countries really badly. For example, rules saying that multinational corporations should pay tax where they have their headquarters. That's not in the Global South, that's in the Global North. So we have these problems that we need to overcome. And the last justice problem that we need to overcome, and this is why we're very keen on linking to the climate negotiations, is exactly that we see the global north countries sometimes try and propose different types of taxes as replacement for the climate finance that they're supposed to deliver. And that's where we're saying we need different types of international mechanisms, but we also need you to deliver the climate finance that you promised. If we fight tax havens, there'll be more money at the national level for everyone. But the first thing you then need to do is deliver on the money that you are committed to deliver to the global south because of your historical responsibility. So these are some of the reasons we need to link this fight for justice that goes across all the negotiations.
Thank you very much, Tove, for making very clear who owes what and where. Any one of my panelists still on this question? Jeon, please.
Okay.
Yes, I think I just want to address the COP30 element of it. So, I mean, UNGO, which is the youth constituency for the the climate change process, and our FFD constituency are all under MGCY. So we have been working with colleagues from the climate finance working group. And what I can say is taxation has been an item that has been discussed before. I mean, there was proposals for like luxury air travel tax, I think it was last COP, and it's probably going to happen this COP too. So, I mean, is there discussions about tax? Yes. I think one of our key priorities with the COP process is how do we bring the work of the convention to COP30? Because I think for a very long time, discussions on tax here at COP has been quite separate. And this process is relatively new. So the question really is for us, how do we integrate the two processes? How do we make the work of the convention relevant, I think, with the context of COP and climate change? And I think that's one of the aims we are trying to facilitate by working closely with the climate finance working group on how we can sort of use our expertise in tax and their expertise in climate change and sort of deliver a unified position that would sort of create the unique selling point, the value of this convention, I think, in the context of climate change.
Thank you very much, John. Climate finance people get taxation people on board. Any comment on this? Asya, please.
Yes.
And then we have Alan.
Perfect. Thank you. I think maybe something to mention as well. So in addition to what Jeon mentioned in terms of the work of Yongo on the topic, what we are seeing as in previous COPs and so on, is that there is this tendency as well from COP spaces to be somehow disconnected from what is happening beyond that. So in the sense of we've been trying, for instance, to organize side events and this discussion around the link between the climate crisis and the need for a general systemic change of the current economic system, because it clearly doesn't work for people, it doesn't work for the nature. And this is like also topics that are very difficult to kind of bring and push forward there, while everyone is really rushed into the negotiation tracks and we're only negotiating, you know, ABC text rather than also thinking about general root causes of the situation and how to address them. So I think this is also something to continue to do in terms of the mobilization with the civil society who is there. It's not always easy because we also have a lot of pushback as well from policymakers, meetings we're having with clearly governments or representative of government saying it's very difficult for us to, you know, make commitments here and then come back to our national constituency to tell them that, you know, well, we're gonna have to be making or creating taxation for climate crisis. So I think we also need to also be taking into account that, especially in the EU, for instance, where you have a lot of kind of far right narratives as well, or very populist narrative in terms of trying to make the link between the climate crisis and the fact that it only needs to be addressed through other means that rather than taxation.
Thank you very much, Asya. Alan, you had your hand up very quickly because I still want to bring one set of questions into the debate because this is all much too intriguing. Alan, please.
Yes. Now, I think I'm going to briefly. I think why again tax. Why we should be talking about tax justice within the COP framework. I think two things. One, when we're looking at climate financing, most of it has been put out there in terms of as external financing. So it's supposed to be a loan, it's supposed to be aid. Even when they are giving loan or that aid, that putting it towards efforts that are also, well, they are financing their own, I would say, adaptation, or things that actually put money back into their pockets. Are the ones that are inventing newer technologies. They're the ones that are coming up with funny, okay, I'm not going to call them funny solutions, but even the money that they are giving, actually is ending up going back to them in terms of, because they're also the ones that are sort of providing some of these solutions. So I think then what the tax narrative does is to say climate financing should be public finance, like Toby said.
Yeah.
It should be that we should not wait for companies to say we are going to finance some solar project somewhere. We should not wait for some country to say we had a meeting and therefore it was about climate, so this is climate finance and all that. And I think why it's important is that we should say we have the money here now, and we can tax it so that then it can finance everything else that that we are trying to do. So that's what I was saying, that we remove it from external aids, loans, and also those going back again to their companies that are doing these other things, to say that no, we have the money here, we have it now, let us get it. Thank you.
Very much so. Thank you, Alan. So we have time for one more question, and then I would like to give our panelists a very last moment for concluding words. But as we are speaking about climate and taxation and justice, rightly so, Kamala and Christabel came up with a very important issue, and this is the question of taxing carbon emissions, carbon pricing, building carbon markets. And I think this will become very clear here. This is very difficult. This is very difficult. It is structurally regressive, so it's not a fair tax. The orthodox carbon pricing we see here, a new system of carbon credit business is created with loads of impacts on land, on people. And the question is, what alternatives we have to still send a signal for the transition away from fossil fuels, which not ends up at the cost of consumers and land and the people. Maybe very few thoughts by someone of you. And what, of course, has the tax convention to do with this? Maybe Tove, you would try and answer?
I would. And the first thing I'll say is that, Marcus, you are the one who should be answering this, because I'm happy to say that there's a report coming out very soon with the Global Alliance for Tax Justice, and you're that, but Marcus has written it. And what the report looks at is that the fossil fuel companies have enormous profits. And as the quiz said, it's 1% of those that are invested into green technology and green transition. They're reinvesting it in more fossil fuels. So what the Marcus's report looks at is, let's take a polluter pays tax on these fossil fuel profits. And let's make sure that we introduce the polluter pays, but also that we scale it up over time. So the suggestion is to have a global level of that tax that simply takes money from the profits and puts it into climate finance. That's an alternative. The carbon market is a long story, but it definitely hasn't been a success. And there are obvious ways to make something much better. And yeah, the report, we're hoping it's coming out maybe already next week.
Thank you very much, Tove. I didn't mean to advertise it, but even better that we have it. Indeed, a surtax on the fossil fuel industry. Time ran out. I found this was a very interesting event today. Nevertheless, in reverse order, all my dear panelists, if you had one wish for COP30 or for the UN Tax Convention, what would this be? Alan, go first, please.
My one wish is that we deliver a UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation that delivers sustainable development. So the entire spread of things, whether in debt, whether in climate, whether in health, with all of it, I think because money and resources are at the foundation of it all. So I'm hoping and I wish that the processes in Nairobi and moving forward will deliver a framework convention that actually delivers sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you. Jaewon, what is your wish?
I think when you look at the sessions of the Framework Convention's negotiating committee, so many countries say it's intergovernmental. And so I would say we want to see a convention that is intergenerational. I think that is the most important. And I think to that, there's three sub-demands. I think we need a framework convention that's intergenerational from the start. We need to have recognition of NGOs, civil society, and most importantly, children and youth as not just observers, but actual partners in this process. And I think finally, we need to normalize children and youth being there in those conference rooms and actively speaking and negotiating. Thank you.
John, thanks a lot. Tove, would you have a wish?
My wish is already coming true. My wish is that we link up all the good forces that we have. And so I'll just say to all of you, Jaewon, Alan, and Asiya, thank you for all your great energy and leadership. It's an absolute pleasure to work with you. Looking forward.
Thanks, Tove. Asia, your wish for COP?
Yes. First one is commitments from policymakers, especially from the Global North, to climate investments that would be based on fair taxation and intergenerational solidarity. Then second point is meaningful engagement of young people in these political and policy processes in general, where we are calling for a fair economic system that invests in our shared future.
Excellent. I wish all your wishes become true so much very soon. Time has come. Thank you very much for all our panelists. Thanks a lot for our participants, for the attendees, for your engagement, for the questions. Big thanks for our interpreters today as well. Please stay tuned with your according networks, emails. We will send around the recording of the webinar with more information and ways for you to get involved. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day and of the week, and all the best for you. Goodbye.